welcome to the Monsoon Academy podcast, a transitions research initiative where we aim to help you map your climate career journey through conversations with diverse industry professionals across the sustainability landscape. You will hear from seasoned experts who have worked on addressing climate issues in South Asia about what their day-to-day work looks like, what kind of skills you will need to be a competitive candidate for those roles, and to see the kind of opportunities that are out there. Let's make the future green together. I'm your host, Shantha Venugopal. Today we are speaking with Dr. Aditya Bahadur, a climate expert on resilience and adaptation in the Global South. He was previously a principal researcher in the Human Settlements Group at the International Institute for Environment and Development, or IIED, and a contributing author to the IPCC Working Group 2's 6th Assessment Report. Currently, Dr. Bahadur is the director for the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, which works at the intersection of science, policy, and practice to tackle the most pressing climate issues in the Global South. Thank you so much for joining us today. Our first question is a simple one. How did you get into this career? What got you interested in the climate and sustainability landscape?
My entry point wasn't climate and sustainability. I had finished my undergrad and I had studied literature and English, which has a lot of critical theory in it. And we end up reading quite a lot of leftist ideology as part of our curriculum, and then based on that as part of my own personal reading. Therefore, I was on a very healthy diet of lots of very exciting political literature. But at that time, after college, for some reason, I decided to take a job in advertising, and my own nascent and slightly naive political ideology and my career were not matching. So at that point, I decided to quit advertising and take up a job for not for profit. And at that time, it wasn't
Right.
with a strategic thought that I'm going to work on climate and sustainability. I just joined something that was kind of a not for profit institution. And there I was lucky enough to get exposed to activities that were focused on disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, sustainability, public health. And that's where my interest started.
Right. So you didn't plan on this pivot at all, but was there something about that workplace specifically that made you excited about the work, or was it that you'd found a calling in the process of learning?
It was a mix of things. Firstly, I found the atmosphere of a not for profit institution much more aligned with my sort of personal desires for what I hope to do with my life. The second thing was I
Mm-hmm.
was lucky enough to be in a place that, even as an entry level person, I got to travel quite widely. So I went to Afghanistan, to work with local volunteers working on
Wow.
disaster risk management. I traveled to Bangladesh to interview flood affected communities in different parts of the country. I traveled to Nepal to look at the institutional architecture for disaster management. And through this exposure, it became clear to me that a career in this field is enriching for a number of reasons.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, so just to step back for a second and to give a 1 minute
Sure.
overview of what my career is actually. So after I did this initial
Yeah.
stint, I went off to study and I decided to focus on climate resilience for my master's and my PhD. And after that, I've essentially worked consistently in research institutes and think tanks that work on climate and development policy. And my job for the last 15 years or so has essentially been advising governments, international institutions, local NGOs, local governments on how to integrate climate risk in their work, if I was to sum it up in one slightly long sentence. So a lot of it is sort of technical input on how to make sure that the work that these institutions are doing is alive to the challenge of the climate crisis.
So our second question is, after you got to the stage that you're at right now in your
hmm
career, what
hmm
is your work like with managing such big institutions? What is the
Uh,
day-to-day work? Was it what you expected?
sure. My day-to-day work, I think, looks like a number of different things. There are three broad things I would say that my work categories that my work falls into. One is research and thought leadership, where I write papers on various technical aspects of climate and development. I was privileged enough to contribute to the last IPCC Working Group 2 report in the sixth assessment cycle. I've written papers for academic journals that people use to do their own research and design their own programs and projects. I've written a large number of working papers, which are internal research documents targeted at particular institutions or governments. So, one is sort of research, and linked to research also is an emphasis on communicating this research. So I try and write op-eds and editorials and do podcasts like this one to communicate my ideas, do TV interviews, speak to the press, etc.
Right.
All this work takes place in coalitions and networks. All the work that I do is done in concert with other organizations trying to achieve the similar objectives. For instance, I helped build something called the Adaptation Research Alliance, which is a group of 250 organizations spread across the world, all working on climate adaptation that advocate for particular things from the international community and from national governments. So one is this thought leadership, communication, coalition building type work. The second bucket of activities is what I would call technical assistance and capacity building, where apart from research and thought leadership, sometimes we're asked to do fairly focused pieces of work. Like a particular international NGO will come and tell us, can you work with our people to design an organization wide framework for climate resilience so that we have a set of guiding values and principles and a roadmap that all our different departments can use to make sure that they're contributing to the goal of climate resilience for vulnerable communities that they're working with. So we'll work shoulder to shoulder with them and produce something that's pretty bespoke and tailored to the needs of a particular organization. And I've done this with bilateral organizations, multilateral organizations, international NGOs, subnational governments. Linked to this very closely is broadly a set of activities that I would call capacity building, where you're trying to transfer knowledge and alter the behavior of people working, on the ground. We could do this through designing short courses. For instance, recently I was designing a short course for urban planners in Bangladesh and Kenya on how to integrate climate risk in urban development. We could do this through
Hmm.
trainings and workshops where you include people in different settings, and through interactive exercises and didactic learning, you try and enhance their knowledge on a particular topic. You could also do this through the development of particular institutional protocols. Like, you can develop a process that an institution has to follow in order to do something so that it becomes more resilient to the impacts of climate change. So the second bucket of activities is around sort of capacity building and technical assistance. And the final bit is, I would say, around organizational leadership, strategy development, and program management. And this basically looks like, making sure that the organization that I'm part of is running well, working with other managers to see how their portfolios are doing, liaising with donors to make sure that the organization is able to secure the funding that it needs to do the work that it should be doing, developing internal organizational strategies. At the moment, I'm about to kick off a process to develop the next 5 year strategy of the Red Cross, Red Crescent Climate Center
Red
that I'm
Cross.
the
Yeah.
director of. And it's like program management. You have to manage budgets, you have to hire consultants, you have to manage staff teams, you have to deliver outputs, and that requires a certain set of management capabilities. Sorry for that slightly unwieldy answer, but I would say thought leadership, technical assistance, and leadership and management are the three sort of sets of activities that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Not at all. This was actually extremely helpful in understanding the kind of skills it takes at this stage in a career to manage multiple fronts at once. Would you say a lot of this was learned on the job, or were there certain factors like a work environment or a mentor or an experience with education that really pushed you forward in understanding all of these different buckets, as you put it?
Everything that you named has contributed to me acquiring the skills that I have. I feel like the role of mentorship is absolutely important. And I can give you a few examples. When I started
Yes,
my
please.
master's degree, there were three people who I worked with as a research assistant to, three professors. And I inculcated a very sort of close relationship with the three of them. As a result of which, two of them agreed to be my PhD supervisors. And the remaining third, became an informal mentor to me. Now, this third person then ended up recruiting me after my PhD. And one of my
Right.
PhD supervisors became a long time collaborator with me, where my relationship with him transcended the PhD and continued into the different jobs that I took through my career. These people did so many tangible things. Like to give you one small and focused example, like my PhD
Sure.
supervisor, he really gave me a lot of confidence to speak on
Mm.
technical issues in public forums. I clearly remember as a first year PhD student, I took on some additional work, and that entailed me to travel from the UK to Nepal to speak to a bunch of international organizations and government employees about climate resilience. And naturally, I was very nervous about it. And before I went, he sat me down and, gave me some tips and tricks and gave me the confidence of presenting in front of this crowd. And also, I forget actually, it was the opportunity also that came from him because he was asked to present, but he
Right.
actually sent me instead. And
Oh,
like that
wow.
early experience, and that went really well. People respected me, and that kind of instilled a certain confidence. That was one of the many
Mm.
things that mentors have done in my life. Now, you also talked about the role of internships. This whole thing started with an internship, and I wanted to switch out of advertising into the nonprofit world. I got that internship, perhaps was, I would imagine, the most important experience that I had because that influenced the entire course of my career. That has now, it's been 18 years since I started, since I did that internship. And so I think that was really, really very important. Apart from this, there are a few other things also that I'd like to mention. I think sponsorship is also really critical. I was
Mm.
only able to do my PhD in the UK because I got a permanent part time job with a strategy consulting firm that essentially
Mm.
helped me to sponsor my PhD. I wouldn't have had the opportunity, if they had not provided that. And then along the way, I was lucky enough to get a few other opportunities. Like, for instance, I got a fellowship to be based in Denmark for a few months at a university there through my PhD. That exposed me to a whole new way of doing research and thinking about problems. I was lucky enough to get funding to attend a summer school on resilience and ecosystems in Hungary that exposed
Mm.
me to various technical aspects of ecosystem management and climate modeling that I wouldn't have had exposure to otherwise. Absolutely. I think people and opportunities have played a very critical role in helping me develop the skills that I have now to do the kind of job that I do.
It actually is the perfect mix of all of these things that I think people sometimes misunderstand in their career
Hmm.
journeys, that you have to kind of grab every opportunity, which is what it sounds like. From your internship to traveling through it, to taking speaker opportunities, meeting new
Hmm.
people, forming those relationships, working in consulting while you did your PhD. It all
Hmm.
sounds like you took every chance, which is really great to hear.
I really feel like, sorry, no, this is
Mhm.
a bit of a philosophical diversion, but I'm going to
Please.
indulge
Yeah.
myself, which is
Yeah.
so often, one thinks about like, is life a sum of, is it luck and fate? Do you have agency? Do you have the able to predetermine where you go? And I feel like it's a mix of both things, right?
Mm.
Like the universe
Mhm.
throws a lot of opportunities at you. And what you're alive to and what you grab, I think, is up to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you clearly took everyone, because it sounds like such an amazing career journey to where you are today as the director at Red Cross at Crescent. Can I ask, so now that you are working as director and that started this year, are there any unexpected challenges or rewards from this role?
There have been a number of unexpected challenges. One main thing that I have learned is, and I think people who don't work in the sector that we do don't appreciate this enough, is that it is very, very taxing. No one else in my family works in the not for profit sector. They're always surprised as to the levels of stress, the working hours
Mm.
that one has to put into the work that we do, because to them it seems like, oh, you're working for a not for profit, right? That should be pretty chilled.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely not like that. I feel like the last 18 years have been extremely exhilarating, rewarding. They've been fantastic experiences, but they've been really grueling, right? I've put in
Hmm.
hours and hours of work. I put in 80-hour weeks. Traveling
Wow.
sounds very glamorous. A lot of my work has involved a lot of travel. I would say on average, I've traveled for a week every 6 weeks for the last 10 years,
Wow.
and maybe a little more than that, actually. And it sounds glamorous, but it really takes a toll on the body and on the mind. And so
Yeah.
if anyone is thinking of getting into this field because they want if they
To
want a
chill.
good work life balance, you have to try really hard to achieve that. It is not a place where that is extended to you naturally. So I feel like that has been a really big learning and a big challenge for me. Even though I feel privileged and lucky and happy to be where I am, I do feel like it's been a huge amount of very hard work in the truest sense of the word. But on the flip side, it's been an extraordinary privilege as well. And, I'm not just saying that to be politically correct. I mean, the main thing is to be able to work for a cause that is more than only about me personally or the comfort of my family. I think is a huge privilege to contribute in a tiny little way to perhaps the greatest challenge mankind has ever faced is an energizing prospect in itself and helps you weather the extraordinary hours of hard work that I just talked about and all other peaks and troughs. The second thing, on a much more base level, the people that work in this field are really amazing. They have a
Yes.
commitment to the communities that they belong to. They have a commitment to the people that they work with. They have extremely diverse interests, all of them in love with the natural world in some way. They're up for a intellectual challenge. So I feel like people that you engage with are also great. And yes, I feel like despite the grueling nature of it, the opportunity to travel around the world, work in different cultures, engage with different kinds of institutions really lends me a perspective of how the world works, which I imagine is quite peculiar to the kind of work that we do.
What I'm hearing is that if you're passionate enough about it and you're committed to these larger challenges that we're all kind of facing, and I think
Yeah,
our generation has to contend with every single day, then the long hours and all of the work and travel that it requires feel more natural.
correct.
These are all really amazing things that you just conveyed to us about your own career and all the different things you've experienced through it. Finally, we would love to include a tidbit on the tips you might have gotten for public
Mm.
speaking that gave you the confidence to
Mm.
take that first leap. But
Hmm.
also, aside from that, more generally, what advice would you give to our generation that's now stepping into either professional careers or deciding what they want to study or making pivots into the sustainability world?
I mean, first thing I really want to underline, and I really mean this, the young people that I meet are immensely inspiring, and I actually feel much more capable than I am in many ways. So I would be hesitant to give them some advice. I mean, the fluency with technology, the commitment to the cause, the vigor that they bring, I think is really remarkable. But I mean, there are a few things that I can share that may be slightly counterintuitive.
Hmm.
Number one is be a people person. I feel like a lot of the opportunity and success that I've had is because I've been able to forge relationships of trust with people that I've engaged with in the professional sphere. So, be interested in people, keep up with people, build networks. Networks give you power, networks give you credibility, networks give you a community. And focus on this right from the beginning because over 10 years, then you'll have a large group of people who want to support you and work with you. So don't underestimate the power of personal relationships. Key to this is, and this is a direct quote coming from one of the three mentors that I talked about, is be nice. Don't be gruff. Don't be rude. Be nice. Of course, I mean, I'm not saying be a pushover, but your instinct should be to be polite, supportive, helpful, kind. And I am convinced that this goes a much longer way than being cut and dried and matter of fact and skeptical. The
That's
second
amazing advice.
the second piece of advice that I think is intuitive is try and develop a technical niche, right?
Mm,
I feel like the era of the generalist is well and truly over. The field that we work in has become really mature. So try and find a tiny little thumbnail size field of knowledge and through your career try and become the dominant individual in within
mm,
that field. Respect, power, opportunities, love, affection will come if people recognize you as someone who has deep and useful knowledge about a small, however small domain. Yeah, I'm going to limit it to those two things.
Thank you so much. And I will remind you for one more, which was
Mhm.
what was that advice about public speaking
Yes,
that
yes. Oh, okay.
encouraged you? Yeah.
My mentor said something to me which I still remember, and this was said to me almost 20 years ago, which was, remember, if you're speaking on a particular topic in a room full of people, the fact that you're standing on stage means you know 90% more than everyone else in the room.
Mm,
So use that to give you the confidence to speak from a place of comfort as opposed to from a place of repetition.
right. Trust your authority on it.
Hmm, correct.
Well, thank you so much for all of this. This was really insightful, and I'm sure our listeners are going to use this advice to gain an upper hand in their careers. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
And
you very much
yeah,
for giving me this opportunity.
in today's episode, we covered a lot about the type of skills and attributes you can develop in order to succeed in your climate career. You've been listening to the Monsoon Academy podcast, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode.